feels like Sub Pop began 68 years ago. I know it's only been 30. It's almost scary how fast 30 years has gone by.
It does feel like it's been 30 years, or maybe even longer in some ways. But that being said, in the 18 years I've been working here, I have that mixed feeling of I still feel like the new guy in some respects, but then in others I feel like I've spent my whole life here.
I came to Sub Pop when the label was one, and I would say the past 29 years have gone by so fast it scares the mother out of me.
I think what makes Seattle special is it's so far away that people came here from a lot of different places and settled, so it's a subtle diversity.
Seattle is different than bigger cities like LA or New York because we are a small, big city. So we have big city opportunities here, but it's a small enough community where you can know the music community at large. You can walk around and you know people.
In the 80s, only the hardiest of bands would make it to Seattle and Portland. And there was no media attention happening. So there's a group of probably 50, 75 musicians who were just playing in various bands and that sprung up briefly and then collapsed and reformed with other people. And that just went on for years and years and years without anyone's attention. By the late 80s, somehow people started taking notice, and by the early 90s, it was insane.
When I started at Sub Pop as an intern in 1989, Sub Pop was clearly a really special place in that there was a whole lot of creative energy and chaos and fun and excitement, and nobody knew what was going to happen in a day. It was a really awesome environment to be in.
Well, Sub Pop was great for us because we were friends. Before the label started and before Mudhoney started, we all knew each other. My previous band to Mudhoney was Green River, and we were one of the first bands on Sub Pop. And Sub Pop was just starting out, and then Green River broke up, and I was working with Bruce Pavitt at Muzak. Jonathan had worked there previously, but wasn't working there anymore, and we'd had a couple of practices that were recorded on a boombox that just sounded like and I brought in a cassette to play it for Bruce, and he was like, I can't tell what's going on here. Here's a couple $100, go record with Jack and Dino, and maybe we can, because he kind of trusted our instincts, and that's where the first single came from.
There was also very little structure. People basically did whatever needed to happen in that moment, and everything was pretty acute because everything was happening all at once, and people were multitasking, and it always seemed like something needed to happen immediately, if not sooner. That sort of defines, I think, the earlier years at the label.
Both us as a band and Sub Pop as a label were learning how to be the things that we were.
There were so many intense financial ups and downs for Sub Pop, and it was hard to understand whether Sub Pop would even survive at times, another day, another week. To be able to think a month ahead almost seemed luxurious. So there was very little stability. There was a time in maybe around 2000 where we were trying to get out of debt again, and we had a huge manufacturing bill, and we had records that we were putting out, and we had employees that needed paychecks, and we needed to have everything out on time. We had some structure at that point, but we didn't have a lot of money.
I started in 2000, which was a really weird point, I think, for the music business. I think a lot of people were struggling. Certainly coming here seemed really risky. Sub Pop is here in Seattle, which, there's not a ton of options relative to Los Angeles or New York to work for another record label. My friends thought I was crazy. I was assuredly going to end up a barista within a year. What else could I possibly end up doing? Sub Pop was rumored to be going bankrupt. One of several periods in Sub Pop's history where it was rumored to be going bankrupt. I had the good fortune of starting at a time when Sub Pop was sort of refocusing their efforts. We were taking bigger gambles on smaller bands that cost less. Just happened to be the perfect time for that, I think. Because at first I thought it was maybe just us. We started signing bands like Iron and Wine and The Shins and Postal Service and Hot Heat and working with comedians like David Cross. All that started 2001. We started those relationships. All those records started coming out in 2002. And it was like a sea change overnight.
By the early 2000s, I would say, they definitely had gotten their shit together. When we came back to the label, it was a much more professional thing. There were departments, and people in the departments actually knew what they were doing. They had a legal team.
In my eyes, it was signing the Shins that sort of gave a whole new life to Sub Pop for a million different reasons. When we were around close to 20, a little before 20, we were late teens, I feel like we sort of started to settle into ourselves in a way that felt grown up and still irresponsible in all the right ways. I think that Sub Pop's history is gives us all a huge sense of pride because we're not a label that ever had it easy.
The success stories are easier to remember when the Shins were blowing up, or Postal Service, or when the Postal Service came back around on their, reunion tour victory lap, and they're, playing in front of what felt like bazillions of people at, Coachella and Primavera, and selling out Barclays Center shows, and you're just like, and nobody even had a clue they were that big, and that was pretty spectacular and meaningful because those guys were my friends. That whole project was born out of just hanging out and talking and just being friends, right? So there's nothing more rewarding than that. And also, again, because of the culture and the way that we run this place, I'm afforded everybody that we work with feels like friends.
People looking at Sub Pop from the outside do have a sense that the label has integrity, that it's kind of like an artistic oasis. They never heard a bad word about Sub Pop.
They're one of a kind. They don't have a sound like any other label. They're so loving in how they pick the bands that they do put on the label, and they're so good at giving opportunities to so many different sounds and so many different bands.
No matter how weird things get with this business, there's always artists who need help. That's the one thing that doesn't change, and that's where we fit in.
When you work for someone like Jonathan Poneman, you don't want to stop. You want to keep going, and you want to keep building on this amazing thing that he created.
The secret to Sub Pop's success is Jonathan's tenacity and passion for music. I think pure and simple, because this place exists because of his will.
We have a community that's so strong, and there are so many exciting, cool things happening in the music community, and I think we all feel driven to be a part of it. I think we have an incredible responsibility to just keep this thing going. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but I like the thought of it. That's exciting, and I hope I'm pleasantly surprised.